In the absolute center of the South Pacific, where the water reaches depths of over 4,000 meters, a single, jagged shard of volcanic rock pierces the surface of the sea. For more than 3,000 kilometers in any given direction, there is no continent, no neighboring shore, only the relentless rhythmic heave of the deep blue ocean. The wind here does not encounter any resistance. It sweeps across the water with a sheer, uninterrupted physical force, carrying the bitter salt of the sea and the cold breath of the abyssal plain. This isolated speck of land was born of violent submarine fire, massive volcanic eruptions that forced boiling magma through the Earth's crust, cooling slowly into hardened basalt and porous tuff over millions of years. Over the centuries, the ceaseless oceanic winds and pounding waves have continuously sculpted its cliffs into sheer, dark walls of stone that drop vertically into the churning surf. To fly above this terrain is to look down upon a statistical anomaly, a microscopic green needle lost in an infinite blue haystack. It defies the standard logic of human settlement and biological distribution. Yet, when one stands upon the damp, dark volcanic soil of the island, the physical weight of human history is profoundly palpable. The earth here is literally layered with the ash of ancient, communal fires, the crushed shells of harvested marine life, and the invisible footprints of those who navigated the uncharted waters long before modern compasses were ever forged. The outside world calls this place Easter Island. The name immediately conjures images of silent, enigmatic stone giants, their enormous carved heads casting long, dark shadows across the pale grass as the sun sets. The global narrative consistently paints this land as an open-air museum of a fallen civilization, a tragic, cautionary tale of environmental collapse, tribal warfare, and abandoned ruins. But that narrative is deeply flawed, omitting the most crucial element of the landscape. To look closely at the rusted tin roofs, the small plumes of morning smoke rising from the green valleys, and the fresh footprints in the dark, coastal sand, is to find a living, breathing society. There are exactly 5,000 residents who call this harsh rock their home today. They are the direct, unbroken descendants of those original Polynesian navigators who survived the impossible crossing in double-hulled canoes. This is not a historical documentary about the dead. This is an observational record of those who remain, a community enduring the profound psychological weight of geographical isolation, fighting every single day to preserve a fragile ancient existence while surrounded by millions of square miles of hostile, unpredictable water. The entirety of human existence on Rapa Nui is tightly compressed into a single, modest, coastal settlement known as Hangaroa. There are no sprawling suburbs, no complex highway networks connecting distant towns across the island. Hangaroa is the singular beating heart of the landmass, a concentrated cluster of low-lying concrete and wood structures huddled against the immense, imposing backdrop of the Pacific Ocean. When dawn breaks over the eastern horizon, it does not arrive with the jarring, mechanical roar of a modern industrial metropolis. Instead, the transition from darkness to light is agonizingly slow, dictated entirely by the slow rotation of the earth and the shifting coastal tides. The local residents refer to this natural, unhurried rhythm as island time. It is a deeply ingrained physiological response to an environment where rushing is fundamentally useless against the scale of nature. As the sun rises, the morning air drops to a crisp, cool temperature, heavily saturated with the pungent scent of raw ocean brine crashing aggressively against the black basalt rocks of the shoreline. Beneath this dominant marine odor lies the dense, earthy aroma of damp volcanic soil, mixing seamlessly with the sharp, sweet fragrance of indigenous Tipani flowers blooming in small, fiercely protected household gardens. The mechanics of survival here are not governed by corporate deadlines or digital schedules, but by the relentless cycle of the sun, the lunar pull of the sea, and the agonizing wait for the weekly cargo plane arriving from the Chilean mainland. The descent of that single aircraft through the heavy ocean clouds is a seismic event, sending a ripple of nervous anticipation through every household on the island. Its iron belly holds the imported fuel, medical supplies, and basic sustenance required to keep this isolated population functioning for another 7 days. In the narrow, unpaved side streets of Hangaroa, the concept of anonymity simply does not exist. The psychological state of being a stranger is entirely foreign to those born here. A walk down the central road is a slow, continuous exercise in social acknowledgement, requiring nods, eye contact, and verbal greetings at every step. Family names carry the heavy weight of centuries, tracing complex lineages back to the original tribal clans that first divided the island. The morning market, a simple, open-air concrete structure exposed to the shifting oceanic winds, serves as the central nervous system of the town. Before the sun has fully cleared the distant, extinct volcanic craters, local fishermen maneuver their rusted, weathered pickup trucks into the dusty dirt lot. In the beds of these vehicles, resting on chipped blocks of melting ice, are the massive, silver-scaled bodies of freshly caught deep-sea tuna and caracana. The thick skin of the fish glistens under the raw, unfiltered daylight, a physical testament to the dangerous, exhausting hours spent navigating small, motorized boats through the unpredictable, towering swells beyond the safety of the coastal reef. Adjacent to the rugged fishmongers, older farmers meticulously arrange their meager, soil-stained harvests on rudimentary wooden tables. The deep, bruising purple of native sweet potatoes sits beside rough, fibrous taro roots, and small, intensely sweet, tropical guavas plucked from the interior valleys. This market is a place of necessary commerce, but more importantly, it is a critical mechanism for human connection and social cohesion. Vital information is exchanged over the rusted weighing scales, cautionary stories of the changing ocean currents are shared, and the invisible ties that bind this vulnerable society together are verbally reaffirmed every single morning. The deliberate, mindful slowness of these daily interactions stands in stark, silent contrast to the frantic, disconnected pace of the continents beyond the horizon. This shared reliance on a single, finite plot of land fosters a powerful, psychological phenomenon of collective identity. There is a silent, unbroken understanding that on an island this fundamentally isolated, the concept of community is not a modern luxury or a moral choice. It is the absolute, non-negotiable mechanism for biological and cultural survival. It is an architectural framework of life built entirely on the indisputable knowledge that the physical well-being of the individual is permanently, inextricably locked to the survival of the group. When a sudden Pacific storm damages a corrugated roof, or when a family requires intensive physical labor to dig a foundation in the unforgiving volcanic bedrock, the residents simply arrive, heavy tools in hand. This is not an act of charity. It is a primal instinct, a deeply embedded genetic memory of cooperation born from hundreds of years of staring out into an empty, unforgiving ocean and knowing that no external rescue is coming. The true epicenter of existence on Rapa Nui is not its physical geography, but its deeply entrenched, fiercely protected cultural heritage. This is a proud, ancient Polynesian lineage that has miraculously survived against an almost insurmountable historical tide of famine, introduced disease, and colonial exploitation. The men and women walking the dirt roads of Hangaroa today do not consider themselves merely random residents of a Chilean territory. They are, first and foremost, Rapa Nui. They carry the unbroken bloodline of the original masterful Polynesian voyagers. Over a millennium ago, these ancestors launched massive, meticulously constructed double-hulled wooden canoes into the terrifying void of the Pacific. They navigated thousands of miles of violent, uncharted ocean without the aid of metal, compasses, or written maps. Instead, they read the subtle thermal shifts in the night air, memorized the complex, shifting architecture of the star-filled cosmos, felt the deep, invisible pulse of underwater currents beneath the wooden hulls, and tracked the migratory flight paths of seabirds. This inherited identity is not a relic. It is an immense, quiet, and enduring source of indigenous pride that permeates every single facet of modern daily life. Listen closely in the shaded doorways of the local shops or inside the humid, echoing school classrooms, and you will hear it. The Rapa Nui language, a distinct, deeply resonant Polynesian tongue, is woven seamlessly alongside modern Spanish. After enduring decades of aggressive cultural suppression and alarming decline, this ancient language is now experiencing a powerful, deliberate revival. It is taught with fierce passion by village elders, its syllables vibrating through the vocal cords of a new generation. It is the language of unwritten histories passed down through intense oral tradition. It is the melodic structure of evening lullabies sung in dimly lit bedrooms and the rhythmic, guttural foundation of ancestral chants that echo off the basalt cliffs. To speak it is to physically breathe life back into the soul of the island. Here, tradition is strictly not a manufactured performance designed to extract currency from visiting tourists. It is a raw, living, breathing organ of the community. This visceral reality is displayed with spectacular, almost frightening intensity during the annual Tapati Festival, a grueling 2-week-long physical and spiritual celebration of Rapa Nui culture. During this period, the normal flow of the island completely halts. The entire population gathers to participate in and witness terrifying tests of ancestral sports and survival skills. The most breathtaking of these is the haka pei. Young, heavily tattooed men and women strip down to traditional loincloths, their bare skin exposed to the biting wind. They hike to the jagged rim of a steep, volcanic crater. There they lash together the heavy, waterlogged trunks of freshly cut banana trees to form crude, heavy sleds. With reckless abandon and profound courage, they launch themselves headfirst down the near-vertical, grassy slope of the volcano. The crushed banana stalks release a sharp, acrid sap as the sleds reach terrifying, bone-breaking speeds, hurtling toward the valley floor in a blur of bruised flesh and raw adrenaline. Simultaneously, the coastal waters become an arena. Fierce competitions in traditional outrigger canoeing and open ocean swimming test the absolute limits of human endurance against the unforgiving Pacific swells. Ashore, bodies are meticulously painted with natural, earth-based pigments, deep ochres, chalky whites, and charcoal blacks, each intricate geometric line tracing a specific family lineage or an ancient spiritual invocation. Every physical exertion is performed with a focused, silent intensity that speaks volumes of a deep, unyielding cultural pride. As night falls during these gatherings, the ancient oral histories of the ancestors are painstakingly recited around roaring, communal fires. The elders tell the epic saga of Hotu Matua, the legendary first king who guided the original canoes to this isolated shore. They speak in hushed tones of the terrifying, perilous Birdman cult, a brutal competition of physical prowess and political dominance once held at the sacred, wind-battered stone village of Orongo, perched precariously on the razor-thin edge of the Rano Kau crater. These stories are told and retold, the flickering firelight casting long shadows, keeping the fragile connection to the past fiercely alive and immediate. In the quiet, dust-filled workshops hidden behind residential homes, the painstaking arts of carving in both dense wood and abrasive stone are quietly transferred from master to calloused apprentice. This is the slow, deliberate preservation of manual skills honed over centuries of isolation. They do not merely carve small commercial replicas of the famous statues, they meticulously shape highly sacred, deeply symbolic figures. Using small, sharp chisels, they carve the Moai kava, grotesque, skeletal wooden figures representing the restless spirits of the dead, their ribs protruding, their eyes wide with otherworldly knowledge. They also carve the rei miro, a smooth, crescent-shaped wooden pectoral ornament traditionally worn across the chest by high chiefs as a heavy, physical symbol of absolute authority. These ongoing traditions are a loud, defiant declaration of a unique, surviving identity, a vibrant, tactile testament to a culture that has stubbornly refused to be extinguished by the passage of time or the harshness of its environment. Of course, it is physically impossible to document the existence of Rapa Nui without confronting the silent, enigmatic, towering figures that have branded this island into the global consciousness, the Moai. These colossal, monolithic stone statues are scattered across the wind-swept landscape like ancient, immovable sentinels. They are the most powerful, visibly dominating link to the island's extraordinary, labor-intensive past. To the Rapa Nui people, these are not mere archaeological artifacts to be studied behind museum glass, they are the Aringa Ora, the literal, living faces of deified, highly venerated ancestors. The vast majority of these giants were birthed from the dark, compressed volcanic tuff of a single, massive quarry, the slopes of Rano Raraku. With nothing but harder stone hand axes, the ancient carvers spent countless years chipping away at the bedrock, freeing these massive forms. Once extracted, the multi-ton statues were dragged across miles of rugged, uneven terrain, using complex systems of ropes, wooden sledges, and immense collective human muscle. They were eventually erected upon massive stone-fitted ceremonial platforms known as ahu, which doubled as the sacred, sealed burial sites for the most important, high-ranking clan members. Crucially, these colossal stone faces were not placed to look out at the terrifying, endless ocean. Their heavy, deeply carved brows and blank, elongated eye sockets were almost exclusively directed inland, staring eternally across the green valleys and settlements. This orientation was highly intentional. It was designed to project their concentrated spiritual power, a raw, supernatural force known as mana. This invisible energy was believed to physically protect their living descendants, ensure the continued fertility of the exhausted volcanic soils, and forcefully provide for the ongoing survival of the fragile community. To walk among them today, feeling the cold, rough texture of the volcanic rock beneath your fingertips is to feel the immense, crushing weight of human history and devotion. At the Rano Raraku quarry itself, the true scale of this obsession is revealed. This is the silent, abandoned nursery of the Moai. Here, hundreds of unfinished statues remain frozen in various, agonizing stages of completion. Some lie half-buried in the shifting soil, while others remain permanently attached, face up, to the solid bedrock from which they were violently being carved when the work abruptly stopped. It is a place of immense, haunting power, a massive, silent, open-air workshop that lays bare the incredible architectural ambition, the ruthless social organization, and the desperate ingenuity of the ancient Rapa Nui civilization. Later in their complex history, many of the standing Moai were further adorned with pukao. These were massive, cylindrical top-knots, some weighing several tons, carved from a completely different, highly porous, blood-red volcanic scoria found exclusively at a separate, distant quarry called Punapau. The logistical nightmare of transporting these fragile red, multi-ton cylinders across the island and perfectly balancing them atop the heads of statues already standing 30 feet in the air remains a staggering, almost incomprehensible feat of primitive mechanical engineering. However, the island's deep history is not just a narrative of creation, it is also deeply scarred by a devastating period of violent internal conflict. During a terrifying era of tribal warfare and profound resource depletion, every single standing Moai on the island was deliberately, forcefully toppled by rival clans, crashing face-first into the dirt to shatter their protective mana. The awe-inspiring statues seen standing proudly along the coastlines today have been painstakingly, mathematically restored in modern times using heavy machinery. Yet, to the Rapa Nui people, this modern restoration is a profoundly powerful symbol of cultural reclamation. Their meaning remains crystal clear. They are a tangible, heavy connection to their bloodline, a profound, daily reminder of the terrifying strength, the absolute faith, and the tragic artistry of their ancestors. Today, they stand once again as the stoic guardians of the island's identity, their immense, silent presence a constant source of psychological pride and a powerful, enduring symbol of cultural survival against the void. In the relentless context of the modern era, the fragile economic survival of Rapa Nui is inextricably physically shackled to its ancient, monumental history. The global tourism industry serves as the primary, roaring engine that drives the local economy, creating a bizarre modern bridge that connects this isolated speck of rock to the sprawling continents of the world. The colossal Moai and the stark, heavily protected landscapes of the Rapa Nui National Park act as a magnetic force, drawing thousands of wide-eyed visitors from every conceivable corner of the globe. This influx of foreign currency has fundamentally altered the landscape of opportunity for the indigenous islanders. Many have adapted to this modern pressure by working as multilingual tour guides, leading groups across the dusty, windswept archaeological sites under the brutal equatorial sun. Generations of families have converted the physical spaces of their private properties into small, modest hotels and intimate guest houses. They operate open-air restaurants that serve local cuisine to foreign palates, and they meticulously carve traditional wooden handicrafts to sell in crowded, sun-baked artisan markets near the harbour. It is a highly direct, deeply personal method of extracting necessary financial sustenance from the constant, churning visitor economy. However, existing entirely beyond the glossy veneer of the tourism sector, the fundamental biological life of the island is still sustained by grueling, traditional, physical labour. The extraction of life from the surrounding ocean remains a vital, non-negotiable pillar of the local economy and the absolute cornerstone of the indigenous diet. Using a necessary blend of fiberglass modern boats and deeply inherited traditional navigation techniques, local fishermen venture out daily into the terrifyingly deep, unpredictable surrounding waters. This is a highly dangerous, physically exhausting task, heavily compounded by the geological reality that the island possesses almost no natural, fully protected deep-water harbours to shelter vessels from sudden Pacific squalls. On land, small-scale intensive agricultural farming plays an equally critical role in communal survival. Extended families dedicate themselves to cultivating small, wind-battered plots of dark volcanic land. They labour under the intense heat to grow heavy, drought-resistant traditional crops, dense sweet potatoes, starchy taro root, and thick clusters of bananas. Scattered across the rolling, grassy interior, there are also isolated, small-scale efforts in cattle ranching and careful beekeeping, attempting to force agricultural diversity upon a landmass with highly limited freshwater resources. Despite these varied efforts, the island's extreme geographic isolation presents a constant, crushing wall of economic challenges. Professional opportunities are severely limited by the sheer physical boundary of the ocean. Nearly all manufactured goods, heavy machinery, diesel fuel for vehicles, and essential, non-perishable foodstuffs must be physically imported across thousands of miles of empty water. This logistical nightmare makes the baseline cost of living on Rapa Nui exceptionally, almost punishingly high, compared to the mainland. A significant portion of the adult population relies heavily on steady employment within the public sector, working for the local municipality or running critical government services, which provides a rigid, stable economic backbone for the community. The daily reality here is a highly delicate, high-stakes balancing act. The community must continuously welcome the outside world to financially sustain themselves, while aggressively guarding their fragile local economy and ancient cultural identity from the toxic pressures of over-reliance on a single, notoriously fickle global industry. The daily food consumed on Rapa Nui is not merely sustenance, it is a direct, brutally honest, and unadulterated reflection of their immediate physical environment. The cuisine is fresh, fundamentally simple, and deeply, historically anchored to the yield of the dark volcanic earth and the turbulent sea. The Pacific Ocean serves as the island's great, unpredictable provider, making fresh marine life the undisputed, beating heart of the local culinary tradition. The deep-water yellowfin tuna, known locally as kahi, is the absolute sovereign of the diet. This massive, muscular fish is so central to their biological survival and cultural joy that a successful, heavy catch arriving in the small, concrete harbour can instantly spark a spontaneous communal celebration. Its dense, dark red flesh is heavily consumed in its purest form as raw ceviche, chemically cooked through the sharp, acidic bite of fresh lime juice and smoothed with thick, rich, locally harvested coconut milk. Alternatively, thick steaks of kahi are simply thrown onto heavy iron grates and grilled over open, smoking wood fires, the fat dripping and hissing on the hot coals below. Other abundant local reef fish, such as the silver-scaled kakana and the aggressive sierra, are daily, crucial staples, providing the massive amounts of lean protein required for the highly physical island lifestyle. From the mineral-rich, exhausted volcanic soil come the other foundational pillars of the Rapa Nui diet: the heavy, complex carbohydrates, massive, bruised purple sweet potatoes known locally as kumara, alongside dense taro roots and fibrous yams, are pulled directly from the earth, their skins caked in dark mud. These hardy crops have been aggressively cultivated on these specific slopes for centuries, serving as the heavy, filling basis for countless traditional meals. But the most sacred, intensely cherished culinary tradition is the physical construction of the umu, the traditional Polynesian earth oven. This is not merely a method of cooking, it is an exhausting, communal engineering project. A wide, deep pit is forcefully excavated into the hard dirt. The bottom is lined with highly porous, heat-retaining volcanic stones collected from the cliffs. A massive fire of dry wood is built directly on top of these stones. Once the fire burns down and the dark rocks are glowing a furious, radiating red in the fading daylight, the remaining ash is swept away. The intensely hot pit is then meticulously layered with massive amounts of food: heavy cuts of pork, whole plucked chickens and split fish, all tightly wrapped in layers of thick damp banana leaves to lock in the steam, alongside mounds of unpeeled sweet potatoes and taro. The entire steaming pit is then sealed shut, covered completely with more broad leaves and a thick layer of heavy earth, trapping the immense heat underground. It is left to slow cook in the dark, subterranean pressure for several hours. When the earth is finally pulled back, the resulting feast is incredibly succulent, heavily infused with the deep, dense smoke of the singed leaves and the hot volcanic rock. This elaborate, labor-intensive method of cooking is strictly reserved for major communal events, acting as a time-honored, physical ritual that forces large groups of family and friends to gather, work together, and equally share in the hard-won bounty extracted from their isolated island. To physically reside on Rapa Nui is to live in a state of constant, intimate, and often submissive dialogue with raw nature. The physical landscape itself acts as a powerful, ever-present, dominating character in the overarching narrative of daily life. Pushing past the coastal zones guarded by the Moai, the interior of the island reveals a stark, untamed, and aggressively windswept beauty. There are virtually no dense native forests remaining to break the wind or provide deep shade. Instead, the undulating topography is tightly covered in a low, resilient blanket of soft, pale green grass, aggressively punctuated by the massive, imposing calderas of the three main extinct volcanoes that violently birthed the island from the seafloor millions of years ago. The highest geographical point, the summit of Terevaka, offers a staggering, terrifyingly empty, 360-degree panoramic view of the entire landmass. From this singular vantage point, the only visible boundary in any direction is the sharp, deep blue curvature of the Earth's horizon meeting the Pacific Ocean. To stand here, battered by the high-altitude winds, is to profoundly, physically, comprehend the sheer scale of their geographical isolation, staring out at a microscopic, fragile green terrarium floating completely alone in a hostile, infinite sea. Beneath the thin layer of soil, the island's violent geological history has left it heavily riddled with a dark, complex, subterranean network of jagged lava tubes and deep, cavernous sinkholes known in the local tongue as ana. Historically, these dark, Claustrophobic underground chambers served highly practical, often desperate purposes. They were used as secure shelters from brutal typhoons, secretive hiding places during the terrifying eras of bloody inter-clan conflict, and even as silent, hidden burial sites for the honored dead, their bones resting forever in the cool, damp dark of the volcanic rock. This intimate, inescapable dialogue with the raw forces of nature dictates every physical movement on the island. The environment here is not merely a passive backdrop. It actively shapes the biological and behavioral adaptations of every living creature that inhabits it. In the 19th century, foreign vessels introduced horses to this isolated ecosystem. Today, hundreds of their descendants roam completely wild and untethered across the open, treeless expanse of the island. Over generations, these animals have physically adapted to the harsh terrain, their hooves growing incredibly hard to navigate the sharp, porous volcanic rock without injury. Their dark, muscular silhouettes grazing quietly against the pale green slopes of the volcanic craters under the shifting equatorial clouds form a striking, constant visual component of the modern Rapa Nui landscape. Moving away from the grassy interior, the physical boundary where the island meets the immense Pacific Ocean is violently dramatic. The coastline is an unforgiving, continuous wall of sheer, dark basalt cliffs that plunge vertically into deep, churning water. There are very few natural breaks in this volcanic fortress. The most precious and historically significant exception is Anakina Beach. Here, the aggressive black rock suddenly yields to a pristine, sweeping crescent of blindingly white, pulverized coral sand, shaded by a dense imported grove of tall coconut palms. The thermal dynamics of this specific cove offer a rare, sheltered environment from the relentless oceanic winds. According to deeply held oral histories, it was onto this exact stretch of soft coral sand that the legendary first king, Hotu Matua, dragged the heavy wooden hulls of his original voyaging canoes. Today, moving through this landscape by foot is not merely a recreational activity, it is a necessary, deeply ingrained physical practice. Navigating the narrow, treacherous dirt trail that traces the razor-thin rim of the immense Rano Kau crater requires intense physical concentration. The path drops sharply on one side into a massive, stagnant caldera lake covered in floating totora reeds, and on the other side it falls 1,000 feet directly into the crashing surf. Perched dangerously on this fragile cliff edge are the meticulously constructed, low-slung stone dwellings of the Orongo ceremonial village. The ocean is an inescapable acoustic and visual reality. Its rhythmic pounding against the cliffs generates a low, continuous seismic vibration that can be felt through the soles of the feet, providing a perpetual, booming soundtrack to daily existence. The physical reality of modern Rapa Nui presents a jarring, complex paradox. It is an environment defined by profound, geographical isolation, yet forced into essential, often fragile connectivity with the industrialized world. The entire population is heavily concentrated in the single main town of Hangaroa, which is serviced by a highly limited network of paved asphalt roads connecting only the primary archaeological sites and municipal buildings. Beyond this immediate zone, the island is crisscrossed by a crude, unyielding matrix of rutted dirt tracks and exposed bedrock paths leading to remote, wind-battered farmsteads and secluded coastal fishing spots. Standard sedans are virtually useless here. The community relies almost entirely on heavy-duty pickup trucks, deeply rusted from the constant salt spray, alongside agile motorcycles and four-wheel quad bikes, which possess the necessary mechanical suspension to survive the brutal, uneven terrain. The ultimate fragile lifeline tethering this floating rock to the globalized world is the Mataveri Airport. Its single, massive strip of dark tarmac visually dominates the southern tip of the island. The sheer scale of this runway is a historical anomaly, significantly extended and heavily reinforced by the United States government in the 1980s to serve as a designated emergency transoceanic landing site for the Space Shuttle program. Today, it receives regular commercial flights traversing the immense void from Santiago, Chile. The physical descent and heavy landing of a massive jet airliner is not a mundane scheduling detail. It is a critical, community-wide, logistical event. The aircraft unloads essential, perishable medical supplies, fresh produce, clusters of foreign tourists, and returning islanders who are met at the chain-link gates by deeply emotional, tightly knit family groups. Equally, if not more vital to biological survival, are the massive, steel-hulled cargo ships that must endure the grueling, dangerous 5-day maritime crossing from the South American mainland. Because the island's violent geological formation left it completely devoid of a protected, deep-water port, these massive freighters cannot physically dock. Instead, they must drop heavy anchors in the deep, turbulent swells far off the coast. The arrival of a ship triggers a highly dangerous, exhausting logistical ballet. Massive steel shipping containers filled with everything from construction timber to diesel fuel and non-perishable food must be carefully, painstakingly lowered by mechanical cranes onto much smaller, flat-bottomed barges bobbing unpredictably in the open ocean waves. These barges are then carefully navigated through the dangerous coastal reefs to a small, concrete offloading ramp. This severe dependence on long-distance, weather-reliant transport means that physical resources are terrifyingly finite and must be aggressively managed. A single severe Pacific storm that delays a cargo ship or forces the cancellation of a flight immediately triggers a cascading chain of physical consequences. Immediate rationing of gasoline, empty shelves where fresh milk and vegetables should be, and a sudden, sharp reliance on emergency reserves. Even modern digital connectivity is heavily compromised by geography. The internet infrastructure exists via satellite, but the data transmission is agonizingly slow, subject to severe latency, and highly unreliable during heavy cloud cover. This digital stutter is a constant, frustrating psychological reminder of the immense physical distance separating the islanders from the rest of humanity, forcing the cultivation of a deeply ingrained culture of extreme resourcefulness and necessary stoic patience. For the younger demographic of Rapa Nui, the experience of physical and psychological maturation on this island is a complex process of deep cultural immersion, heavily weighed against severe geographical limitations. The localized public school system provides formal education up to the secondary high school level. Within these concrete classrooms, the standardized national curriculum is deeply intertwined with mandatory, passionate instruction in the Rapa Nui language, local history, and ancestral agricultural practices. These children grow up with a profound, unshakable, psychological foundation of indigenous identity. Their physical playground is a world-renowned open-air archaeological park. The bedtime stories they absorb are not generic fairy tales, but the brutal, heroic, and highly specific survival legends of their direct bloodline. However, the rigid physical boundaries of the island dictate that opportunities for advanced higher education and highly specialized professional careers are virtually non-existent locally. For the vast majority of ambitious youth, pursuing a university degree in medicine, engineering, or complex sciences requires a mandatory, highly disruptive physical relocation. They must board a plane and traverse thousands of miles of ocean to integrate into the massive, concrete university campuses of mainland Chile or even further abroad. This physical separation acts as a brutal, modern rite of passage. They are suddenly thrust from a silent, predictable agrarian society where every face is intimately known into the jarring, anonymous, high-speed sensory overload of a sprawling, industrialized metropolis. They must endure severe culture shock, adapting to a completely alien rhythm of life to acquire necessary modern knowledge. Yet the psychological and spiritual pull of the volcanic soil, the deep, invisible tether to their extended families, and the inescapable gravity of their community remains incredibly strong. A statistically significant number of these educated young adults make the deliberate, conscious choice to physically return to the extreme isolation of their birth. They do not return empty-handed. They bring back critical, highly specialized knowledge, fresh global perspectives, and modern technological methodologies. They reintegrate into the local ecosystem as licensed physicians staffing the small hospital, structural engineers designing weather-resistant infrastructure, marine conservation scientists monitoring the fragile reef health, and local entrepreneurs building sustainable businesses. The ultimate, overarching existential challenge for this returning generation and for the entire island's governance is the desperate need to engineer a viable, sustainable economic path forward. They must forcefully create enough diverse, intellectually meaningful professional opportunities to physically retain the next generation, allowing them to construct a modern future on the rock they love, while fiercely preserving and enriching the ancient, fragile cultural framework that entirely defines their existence. The physical rhythm of day and night on Rapa Nui is a profound study in stark, visually striking environmental contrasts. During the peak daylight hours, the central settlement of Hangaroa is heavily defined by a necessary, outward-facing mechanical energy. The narrow dirt and asphalt roads hum with the friction of heavy tires as local tour guides expertly maneuver four-wheel drive vehicles toward the highly protected, sacred archaeological zones. Down by the small concrete harbour, calloused fishermen shout rapid commands over the roar of outboard motors, actively wrestling heavy catches of tuna onto the slick, blood-stained docks. The overall acoustic frequency of the day is dense, filled with overlapping conversations in rapid Spanish and resonant Rapa Nui, mingling with the constant, unavoidable sound of the Pacific surf crashing against the black coastal basalt. However, the very moment the sun begins its rapid descent beneath the western oceanic horizon, a dramatic, almost theatrical shift in the island's atmospheric pressure occurs. The harsh, blinding equatorial light softens into a thick, golden haze that casts long, highly dramatic shadows behind the towering, stoic figures of the Moai. As darkness physically swallows the landmass, a profound, heavy quiet systematically descends upon the isolated community. The aggressive, outward-looking energy of the daytime economy instantly collapses inward. The cold, damp evenings here are fiercely protected. Highly insular periods strictly reserved for extended family units, immediate communal bonding, and deep physical rest. Behind the closed doors and thick walls of private homes, multiple generations gather around low, warm fires or simple electric stoves to consume the heavy, nutrient-dense meals harvested directly from the surrounding ecosystem. The faint, rhythmic plucking of a wooden ukulele or the deep, guttural vibration of a traditional ancestral chant might drift momentarily from a distant community hall where physically exhausted dancers relentlessly practice their complex routines for an upcoming cultural festival. But outside these small pockets of human warmth, the night is terrifyingly dark and profoundly peaceful. Because this volcanic rock is situated thousands of kilometers away from the pervasive, blinding light pollution generated by massive industrialized continents, the nocturnal sky transforms into a staggering, deeply intimidating optical canopy. The Milky Way does not merely twinkle, it aggressively dominates the visual field, a thick, glowing band of infinite cosmic dust arching heavily over the silent stone giants. To stand alone under this specific, unfiltered sky is to instantly, viscerally understand the exact visual map utilized by the ancient Polynesian seafaring ancestors. They did not view this terrifying expanse of stars as a random void, but as a highly precise, reliable navigational matrix that successfully guided their fragile wooden hulls across the deadliest, most unpredictable ocean on the planet. Yet, existing within this seemingly idyllic, deeply spiritual Pacific paradigm is fraught with severe, physically life-threatening logistical realities. The daily mechanics of biological survival here are heavily burdened by the extreme, undeniable constraints of absolute geographical isolation. The basic acquisition of fresh, potable drinking water is a highly critical, constantly monitored environmental concern. Because the island possesses almost no permanent surface rivers, the entire population relies heavily on the slow, delicate extraction of water from hidden subterranean aquifers deep within the porous volcanic rock. Any shift in the global climate, any prolonged period of severe drought, instantly threatens this fragile, finite, geological reserve. Furthermore, the deep, historical scars of catastrophic, ancient deforestation have left vast, exposed tracts of the rolling landscape highly vulnerable to severe soil erosion. When the brutal, aggressive tropical rains arrive, they physically strip away the vital, nutrient-rich topsoil, forcing the local agricultural community into a constant, exhausting physical battle to reforest the exhausted slopes and artificially stabilize the bleeding earth. The fragility of human biology is also a constant, terrifying psychological weight. While a small, modestly equipped local hospital provides absolutely critical, basic medical care for the 5,000 residents, its capacity is strictly limited by its physical isolation. If a local fisherman suffers a catastrophic physical trauma on the jagged reef, or an elder experiences a severe, complex cardiac event, the situation instantly escalates into a terrifying logistical nightmare. Survival often strictly dictates a highly dangerous multi-million peso emergency medical evacuation flight. The patient must be strapped into an aircraft and flown for over 5 hours across the empty, turbulent airspace of the Pacific Ocean, just to reach an operating room on the South American mainland. Even the very industry that financially sustains the modern island, the relentless influx of global tourism, presents a highly complex, potentially toxic, existential threat. The indigenous community is forced to navigate a terrifyingly delicate, high-stakes tightrope walk every single day. They must graciously open their ancestral home to the world, extracting necessary foreign currency to survive, while aggressively, physically guarding their fragile cultural identity from being completely diluted, heavily commercialized, or outright destroyed by the crushing weight of foreign influence. The colossal stone moai and the massive, sacred ceremonial platforms they stand upon are incredibly fragile, carved from soft, highly porous volcanic tuff that constantly degrades under the brutal wind and rain. Protecting these sacred sites from the physical erosion caused by the heavy footsteps and careless hands of thousands of daily tourists requires an exhausting, vigilant, and highly organized daily effort, a monumental task now fiercely managed entirely by the indigenous Rapa Nui Park Authority known as Moai. Balancing the absolute preservation of this highly unique, irreplaceable archaeological heritage against the cold, hard economic necessities of the modern industrialized world is the central, dominating conflict for the Rapa Nui people. In an era defined by relentless, high-speed digital connectivity, massive urban sprawl, and the dangerous illusion of limitless geographic mobility, one must ask a fundamental, overriding question. Why do these individuals consciously, deliberately choose to remain permanently anchored to this microscopic, highly vulnerable dot of rock, completely surrounded by the most aggressive, unpredictable body of water on Earth? The psychological answer is not found in what this isolated island physically lacks, but in the profound, irreplaceable elements it provides in massive abundance. They do not stay here simply because they are trapped. They stay because of a deep, unbreakable, almost magnetic biological connection to the specific coordinates of their ancestors. It is a heavy, comforting feeling of belonging to an ancient, specific lineage that is literally, physically, etched into the towering stone faces and buried deep within the dark, ash-filled soil beneath their feet. They consciously choose to endure the terrifying isolation for the absolute security of existing within a tight, fiercely protective, communal network. Here, the anonymity of the modern world does not exist. If you fall, the entire community physically knows your name and will actively rush to pull you back up. They stay for the unparalleled, highly precious freedom to raise their children in an environment where the physical boundaries are defined not by concrete walls and traffic lights, but by the sweeping, epic beauty of extinct volcanic craters and the crushing blue vastness of the sea. Above all else, they remain physically tethered to this landmass because of a profound, overriding spiritual bond known locally as Te Pito or Te Henua, the concept of the land as the literal, life-giving center of the universe. It is the powerful, unyielding sensation of possessing biological roots that run just as deep and grip just as fiercely as the dark basalt cliffs holding back the crushing weight of the ocean. To live on Rapa Nui is to make a conscious, highly rebellious choice against the frantic, disconnected grain of the modern world. It is a life strictly measured not by the accumulation of abstract digital wealth or immediate consumer convenience, but by the deep preservation of physical heritage, the unbreakable strength of familial bonds, and the quiet, stoic endurance of the human spirit. Here, standing completely alone at the absolute edge of the habitable world, surrounded by the greatest, most terrifying ocean on Earth, they have proven that a deeply profound, culturally rich, and incredibly meaningful human existence